On a morning in July of 1884, the sound of a hammer striking limestone echoed between quarry walls 50 feet high. A woman knelt at the end of a stone path, her silver braid hanging over one shoulder, her swollen hands pressing a flat piece of rock into place. Behind her terrace gardens climbed the quarry walls in steps of green. A pond reflected the sky so perfectly, it looked like a hole cut through the earth into heaven. Water cascaded down the far wall in thin ribbons that caught the light and threw it back in fragments. 7 women worked across the quarry floor, their voices and laughter bouncing off stone that had known nothing but silence for nearly 20 years. The woman with the silver braid sat back on her heels and looked at what she had built. She was 65 years old. Her hands ached in ways that never stopped. Her back carried pain like a second spine, and she was more alive than she had ever been in 30 years of marriage. 10 months ago, she had driven a horse cart into the same quarry with 2 trunks, $12, and a plan to die. This is her story. October 1883, Millhaven, Pennsylvania. The courtroom smelled like pipe tobacco and wood polish. Vivian Ashford sat on the left side of the room alone. No lawyer beside her because no lawyer in Millhaven would take her case. No friend behind her because friendship, it turned out, followed money the way rivers follow gravity. She wore her best dress, the dark blue one she had sewn herself 3 years ago, and she sat with her hands folded in her lap, the way she had been taught a lady should sit. And she waited for a man she had slept beside for 30 years to explain to a judge why she deserved nothing. George sat across the aisle. New suit, new vest, the kind of confident posture that comes from knowing the outcome before the trial begins. His lawyer, a man named Prescott from the county seat, had a stack of papers that looked important. Vivian had no papers. She had a marriage certificate and 30 years of labor that existed nowhere on any document, because the work of making a home, of raising children, of keeping a man's life running smoothly was the kind of work the world had decided did not count. The judge entered. Judge Clifford Hargrove, 60 years old, silver hair, the kind of face that looked carved from the same limestone that built the courthouse. Vivian watched him take his seat and felt something cold settle in her chest. She knew Clifford Hargrove. Everyone in Millhaven knew him, and everyone knew his daughter. Catherine Hargrove was 34. She had auburn hair and a laugh that carried across rooms. She had been seen with George Ashford at the hotel in Briarfield 3 times in the past year. She was the reason Vivian was sitting in this courtroom, and her father was the man holding the gavel. Vivian stood. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Your Honor, I must object. You have a personal interest in this case. Your daughter is involved with my husband." The courtroom went quiet. George looked at his lawyer. Hargrove looked at Vivian the way a man looks at a fly that has landed on his dinner. "Mrs. Ashford, I am the only judge in this county. If you wish to petition for a different judge, you may file with the state court in Harrisburg. Processing time is approximately 6 months." He paused. "Do you have somewhere to live for 6 months while you wait?" She did not. George had already changed the locks. Vivian sat down. She folded her hands again, and the trial proceeded. It did not take long. George's lawyer presented the assets. The house on Mill Street that Vivian had wallpapered and painted and furnished and maintained for 3 decades. The general store that brought in a comfortable income, and an income Vivian had helped manage through 2 recessions by cutting household costs so deeply that George never felt the pinch. The savings account at Millhaven Savings and Loan. The good horse and carriage. The silver candlesticks that had been Vivian's mother's but were in George's house, and therefore apparently George's silver. All of it went to George. Every piece of a life Vivian had built with her hands and her time and her years. Gone in sentences, read from paper. And then George's lawyer called his witness. Walter Ashford walked to the front of the courtroom, and Vivian felt something tear inside her that she knew would never fully heal. Her son, 38 years old, the boy she had carried inside her body, the child she had nursed through scarlet fever when he was 4, sitting up for 3 nights straight, pressing cool cloths to his burning forehead. The young man whose first suit she had sewn by hand, whose spelling she had drilled every evening, whose scrapes she had cleaned, and whose tears she had dried. Her son. He did not look at her when he spoke. "My mother did not contribute financially to the household at any point during the marriage. My father built the business himself. All assets are the result of his labor." The words hung in the air like smoke. Vivian stared at Walter's profile and watched him study the wall behind the judge's head with the intense concentration of a man who knows that if he turns his eyes even slightly to the left, he will see something that will break him. He knew what he was doing. He chose to do it anyway. Vivian did not speak. There was nothing to say that the room would hear. Judge Hargrove read the settlement. George received the house, the store, the savings, the horse, the carriage, the life. Vivian received the parcel of land known as the Millhaven North Quarry, currently disused as recorded in the county tax auction of 1879. George leaned forward and spoke loud enough for Vivian to hear, though he addressed the judge. She can have the quarry. Nobody wants it. At least she'll have somewhere to go. Somewhere to go. After 30 years of building his world with her bare hands. Somewhere to go. Vivian looked for Dorothy, her daughter 34, married and living 2 towns over. Dorothy was not in the courtroom. She had sent a letter that arrived 3 days ago. Vivian had read it so many times the creases were wearing through. I don't want to choose sides. I'm sorry, Mother. Vivian had folded the letter and placed it in her pocket where it still sat. Silence was aside. Dorothy had chosen it. The gavel came down. The marriage was dissolved. 30 years reduced to 20 minutes of paperwork and a parcel of worthless rock. Vivian gathered herself, stood, smoothed her dress, walked toward the door with the careful dignity of a woman who understands that how you leave a room is sometimes the only thing you get to control. She made it to the hallway before she saw them. Catherine Hargrove stood by the window, sunlight catching her hair, smiling at something in her own thoughts. Her left hand rested on the windowsill, and on her ring finger sat a gold band. Vivian stopped. She knew that gold. She knew its color, its weight, the way it caught light. She had placed a ring made from that same gold onto George's finger in the Millhaven Church in 1853, standing before God and 60 witnesses and promising forever. George had taken that ring, the physical symbol of 30 years, and melted it down, reshaped it, given it to a woman half Vivian's age. He had not just left her, he had erased her. Vivian walked out of the courthouse into October air that smelled like fallen leaves and wood smoke from someone else's warm home. She climbed onto the cart she had borrowed from a neighbor and picked up the reins. The horse waited. The road waited. And somewhere north of town, a hole in the ground waited for a woman the world had decided was worth nothing. The quarry road was 3 miles of rutted dirt through bare autumn woods. Vivian's cart held 2 trunks of clothing, a set of cooking pots, 3 knives, 2 wool blankets, a box of candles, and $12 in coin. This was the complete inventory of her life after 30 years of marriage. $12, the cost of being a wife who never earned a wage because her husband said one income was enough because her work happened inside a home and therefore did not exist. The trees thinned, the road ended, and the quarry opened before her like a wound in the earth. Limestone walls rose on 3 sides 40 to 50 feet high, curving in a rough amphitheater shape. The stone was layered in bands of gray and cream and pale brown, cut in step shelves where men with picks and dynamite had carved away the rock for 20 years before the good stone ran out and the company moved on. The quarry floor was a tangle of dead weeds, broken stone, and rusted machinery. Vivian could see the remains of the operation, a winch with cables frozen in rust, a line of narrow gauge rail leading to nothing, a pile of iron chain, 3 ore carts tipped on their sides like dead animals. At the far end against the back wall sat the tool shed, 15 feet by 20, walls of weathered wood gone the color of old bone, a roof of corrugated iron, half of it lifted by wind and never repaired. 1 window cracked, 1 door hanging from a single hinge at an angle that looked like exhaustion. Vivian climbed down from the cart and walked toward it. Her knees protested. Her back, which had ached for years, sent a sharp reminder that 64 was not an age designed for starting over. She reached the door and pushed it open. The smell hit first, mildew and machine oil and something organic and rotten underneath. The floor was cracked concrete. The walls were bare wood with gaps where boards had warped away from each other. Rusted tools hung from nails. Old paint cans lined one wall, their labels long faded. In the corner sat a straw mattress, stained dark with age and chewed through by mice who had left their droppings scattered across the surface like black seeds. This was it. This was where a lifetime of marriage had led. This was what she was worth in the final accounting. A shed full of mouse droppings and a hole in the ground. Vivian gripped the door frame because her legs were going. Not from the walk, from the understanding that was settling over her like cold water. She was 64. She was alone. She had $12. She had no profession, no trade, no skill that any employer would recognize. She had children who had chosen their father. She had a world that saw a woman her age as something between invisible and inconvenient. And she had this. She sat down on the straw mattress. It crunched and sagged beneath her. Through the cracked window, she could see the quarry walls rising against the October sky. Gray stone, gray clouds, gray future. She thought, this is where I die. Not today, but this is where it happens. This is what 64 and discarded looks like. She sat as the light faded, as the temperature dropped, as the first rain began tapping the iron roof gently, at first, then harder, then finding the gaps and dripping through onto the floor and onto her shoulders and onto her hands folded in her lap. She sat and felt the cold move through her coat and into her skin and into the place beneath her skin where she kept the last of her warmth. That night, curled on the straw mattress with her coat pulled over her like a blanket, listening to rain drum the roof and drip through in steady streams, Vivian cried, not quietly. She sobbed until her throat tore. She sobbed until her ribs ached and her eyes swelled shut, and her body shook with the force of grief that had been building since the moment Walter opened his mouth in that courtroom and denied her existence. She cried for the house she had made beautiful, for the children she had raised, for the 30 years she had given to a man who weighed them against gold and found them lighter. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she slept. Dawn came cold and pale. Vivian's body screamed when she tried to move. Every joint had stiffened overnight and the arthritis in her hands had turned them into claws that took 5 minutes of careful flexing before they would open. Her back felt like someone had driven railroad spikes into her spine while she slept. She was 64 and her body was making very clear that it had not agreed to any of this. She managed to stand, managed to limp to the door, managed to push it open and step outside. Morning sun was just breaking over the quarry rim, sending a shaft of gold light across the far wall. And Vivian saw something she had missed in yesterday's despair. The quarry was not just gray. The limestone walls held layers of color, cream and tan and a soft pink where iron minerals stained the rock. Where water seeped through cracks, it left trails of white and yellow mineral deposit that caught the new light and glittered. At the bottom of the quarry, water had collected in natural depressions, forming shallow pools that reflected the sky so clearly they looked like pieces of fallen heaven. And on the far wall, where the morning sun hit directly, water trickled down from a crack 8 feet above the ground. It ran in a thin stream, carving a groove into the stone over what must have been decades, pooling at the base in a natural basin the size of a washtub. A spring, a natural spring in the quarry wall. Clean water flowing steady in a place everyone said was dead. Vivian walked toward it slowly. Her knees hurt, her back hurt, everything hurt. She reached the wall and placed her palm against the cold, damp stone. Felt the water seeping through the crack running between her fingers. Felt the stone solid and alive beneath her hand. And something shifted inside her, not hope. She was not ready for hope, but a question forming in the dark the way a crack forms in stone before the water finds it. If water could still flow from this abandoned place, if stone could still catch light and throw it back as beauty, then maybe she was not as empty as she believed. Maybe she was like this quarry, not dead, just waiting for someone to look closer. Vivian pulled her hand away and looked at her palm, dirty with limestone dust, lined with 64 years of living, swollen at the knuckles where arthritis had taken residence. These hands had made homes beautiful for 30 years, had hung wallpaper and mixed paint and arranged furniture and planted gardens and sewn curtains and polished wood until it shone. George had looked at these hands and seen nothing worth keeping, but these hands still worked. She turned and looked back at the tool shed. Still a disaster. She was still alone and broke and abandoned in a hole in the ground. But the sun was climbing and the water was flowing, and her hands, though they ached, still opened and closed. She made a decision, not because she felt brave, because the alternative was sitting on that mattress waiting to die, and some stubborn, angry, unreasonable part of her refused. If she was going to die in this quarry, she would die in the middle of doing something, not waiting. She started with the mattress, dragged it outside into the sun. It was heavy and her back screamed, and she had to stop twice to let the spasm pass, bent over with her hands on her knees, breathing through her teeth. But she got it out, found a broom that still had enough bristles to sweep, cleared the shed of droppings and dirt and dead leaves, wiped surfaces with wet rags. The work made her hands ache worse, made her back feel like it was separating from her body, made her breathe hard in ways that frightened her. But she kept going. By afternoon, the shed was cleaner. She brought her trunks inside, found the corner that least covered the worst roof gaps with a piece of iron sheeting she pried from the rusted ore cart outside. That night, she slept on the dried mattress, still uncomfortable, still cold, still alone. But she had made it through one day. That was the only unit of measurement that mattered now. One day. 2 weeks passed. Vivian established a routine built from necessity and stubbornness. Wake at dawn, wash her face in spring water so cold it made her gasp. Eat dried salt pork and hard bread, rationing carefully. Work. She sorted the rusted tools, keeping what was serviceable. Cleared weeds from around the shed. Reinforced the roof with scrap metal. Cleaned until the shed smelled like limestone dust instead of rot. At night, exhausted beyond thought, she ate and slept deeply. She spoke to no one. No one came. No one called. She existed in silence with stone and sky and the sound of water trickling down the far wall for company. Her body hurt in ways she did not know a body could hurt. Her hands swelled until the knuckles looked like walnuts. Her back went from aching to occasionally seizing so badly she would drop whatever she held and stand frozen, unable to breathe, waiting for the muscles to release. Her knees ground like millstones. But she kept going. What else was there? At the end of the second week, she heard hoofbeats on the quarry road. The sound was so foreign after 14 days of silence that Vivian grabbed the heaviest tool within reach, a rusted wrench, and stood in the shed doorway with her heart hammering. The horse and cart that came around the bend belonged to Hazel Pennington, 70 years old, widowed, living in a small house at the edge of Millhaven on money her husband had left. Hazel was the only person in town who had spoken kindly to Vivian before the divorce. She was also the only person who had come. Hazel climbed down with a basket, eggs, large salt flour, candles. Vivian stared at the food and felt her throat close. She had not realized how hungry she was until someone offered to feed her. They sat on the stone step Vivian had placed in front of the shed door. Hazel looked around the quarry with careful eyes. "You've been cleaning," Hazel said. "There wasn't much else to do." Hazel nodded. Then she said the thing she had driven 3 miles to say. George married Catherine last Saturday at the church. Walter stood as best man. Vivian held very still. The church. Her church. The pews she had polished for the Christmas service every year for 3 decades. The altar where she had said her own vows. George had stood there with another woman and said the same words, and their son had stood beside him, holding the ring, and the town had watched and blessed it. "Did Dorothy come?" Vivian asked. Hazel shook her head, but she didn't object either. They sat in silence. Then Hazel spoke again, quieter. "There's talk in town, Viv. People say you've gone mad, living in a quarry like an animal. Reverend Aldrich preached about it Sunday, about women who don't know their place." Hazel paused. "He didn't say your name. He didn't have to." Vivian looked at the quarry walls, 50 feet of stone on 3 sides, a wall between her and the world as real as any sermon. "There's something else," Hazel said, lowering her voice, though no one was within miles. "I heard Clifford Hargrove talking at the tavern. He mentioned this quarry in the Pennsylvania Railroad. Something about a new line they're surveying through this area." She looked at Vivian. "If that's true, this land has value, Viv. And if it has value, they'll find a way to take it from you." Vivian filed that information in the back of her mind the way she filed everything now. Carefully, because she could not afford to lose a single useful thing. But she did not act on it. She was too busy surviving one day to worry about what someone might do in 30. Hazel left before dark. Vivian watched the cart disappear up the quarry road and stood alone in the fading light, holding a basket of food that represented the complete sum of human kindness she had received in 2 weeks. She went inside, ate 2 eggs and a piece of bread, sat on the mattress, and waited for whatever came next. What came next was the storm. It arrived in the 3rd week of November. Not the gentle rain she had grown used to, but a true autumn gale. Dark clouds piling up against the quarry rim. Wind howling across the open floor, finding every crack in the shed walls. Rain coming down in sheets so thick she could not see the far wall. Vivian huddled in the shed as water found every weak point in the roof, every gap in the walls. She moved her mattress to the driest corner and watched the floor turn into a shallow lake. Everything she owned got damp. The cold went past her skin, past her muscles, into her bones, and settled there like it planned to stay. It rained for 2 days straight. By the 2nd day, she was shivering constantly, unable to get warm no matter how tightly she curled. She had not been dry in 36 hours. Her fingers were white and numb. Her cough, which had started as a tickle, now rattled deep in her chest. The second night, somewhere between waking and sleeping, her mind drifting on currents of cold and exhaustion, Vivian thought clearly, this is how it ends. Pneumonia at 64, dying alone in a hole in the ground because her husband found someone younger, dying because the world decided she was not worth keeping warm. The thought did not make her sad, it made her angry. The anger came from somewhere deep and hot, a place she did not know existed. It rose through the cold and the exhaustion in the 2 weeks of silent endurance, and it hit her like a fist. Vivian stood up from the wet mattress. She was shaking. Her whole body was shaking, but she was standing. She screamed. Not words at first, just sound raw and ragged, bouncing off the quarry walls and coming back to her multiplied. Then words came. I'm not dying in this shed. I am not dying because some man decided I wasn't worth keeping. I am 64 years old and I still matter. I still matter. She grabbed the bucket and stormed out into the rain. Soaked instantly. She did not care. She stomped through the flooded quarry to the nearest wall and started bailing water, throwing bucket after bucket, completely pointless. Rain fell faster than she could ever bail, but she needed to feel her arms moving, needed to feel some control over something, anything, even something futile. On her seventh trip, her boots slipped on wet stone. She went down hard against the quarry wall, slamming her shoulder into limestone. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She grabbed at the wall to steady herself, gasping, her hands scrabbling across wet rock. And under her right palm, something moved. Vivian froze. She pressed her hand where she had felt the shift. A section of stone felt different from the rest. Looser, separate. She pushed and felt it give, found a grip with her fingertips and pulled. The section resisted. Then it broke free and tumbled to the ground with a heavy splash. Where the stone had been, there was now a gap in the wall, a hollow space behind the rock face, and from that hollow water was flowing. Not a trickle like the spring she already knew. A real stream 3 inches wide pouring from the gap with steady force, clean and clear even in the gray rain. Vivian bent and picked up the stone that had fallen. Heavy, rough, ordinary limestone on most surfaces. But where it had broken from the wall, a vein of crystal ran through the gray like a secret. Not gold, not silver, quartz or calcite, something common, something worthless by any market measure. But in the rain and the fading light, even that thin vein caught what little glow remained and threw it back. Vivian stood in the pouring rain, 64 years old, soaked to the bone, holding a broken piece of rock with a crystal vein no wider than her finger. She looked at the gap in the wall streaming water. She looked at the stone in her hands. The quarry had been dug out, used up, emptied of everything anyone thought valuable, and abandoned, written off. But behind the worthless surface, water had been flowing all along. Small beauty hidden, waiting for someone to break through. Vivian tilted her face up to the rain and laughed. It was a broken sound, half wild, but it was real. The first genuine laugh she had produced in months. She laughed at the absurdity. Standing in a storm at 64, soaking wet, holding a rock, finding something luminous in a place everyone said was dead. She carried the stone back to the shed, placed it on the workbench where she could see it from the mattress. Then she picked up the bucket and went back to bailing. The storm would end, she would dry out, and then she would figure out what came next. One day at a time, one bucket at a time, one small discovery at a time. On the morning of the third day, Vivian woke to silence and light. The rain had stopped. Sun came through the cracked window at a low angle and landed on the workbench, and the crystal vein in the broken stone caught it and scattered it across the shed wall in tiny points of light. Vivian lay still, watching those points move as the sun climbed. Then she got up slowly, painfully, and walked outside. The quarry floor had transformed. Dry, cracked earth now held dozens of pools reflecting the morning sky. The walls streamed with evaporating water, dark stone drying in patches that revealed the color underneath. And from the gap she had opened, water still flowed steady and sure, collecting in a natural depression and forming a pool 6 feet across, clear enough to see the bottom. Vivian knelt beside it. Her knees sent sharp objections. She ignored them. She cupped water in her swollen hands and splashed her face, cold, clean, alive. She looked around the quarry with eyes that were different from the eyes that had arrived here 3 weeks ago. Those eyes had seen a grave. These eyes saw something else. Not paradise. Not even possibility quite, but raw material, stone and water and metal and wood and 30 years of knowing how to make something from almost nothing. She had survived, but survival was the bare minimum. She had been surviving her entire marriage, surviving being invisible. Survival was not enough. She wanted to build something. Not for George, not for Walter or Dorothy or the people of Millhaven who thought she had gone mad. For herself. To prove to the only person whose opinion she was learning to value herself that her hands could still create. Vivian stood, looked at the tool shed, looked at the quarry full of abandoned materials, looked at her own hands swollen and aching and 64 years old, and got to work. The first thing Vivian built was a way to carry water. She had found the pipes 2 days after the storm buried under a collapsed section of the ore cart track. Cast iron, most of them rusted through, but 7 sections were intact enough to hold water. Each section was 4 feet long and weighed more than she wanted to think about. Getting them from the rail bed to the spring wall took an entire day. She could carry 1 section at a time cradled against her chest, and she had to stop every 30 yards to set it down and wait for her back to unlock. By the 5th pipe, her arms were trembling so badly she dropped it on her foot. By the 7th, she was dragging it across the quarry floor because lifting was no longer something her body would permit. Fitting them together took 3 more days. She had no solder, no couplings, no plumber's knowledge. What she had was stubbornness and the kind of problem solving that comes from decades of fixing things in a house where calling a repairman was a luxury George said they could not afford. She packed the joints with mud and grass the way she had once patched the gap under the kitchen door during the blizzard of 1876. Water leaked at every seam. She tore strips from a ruined blanket and wound them around the joints, packed more mud, let it dry, tested again. Still leaking. She tried clay from the quarry floor mixed with ash from her cook fire. Better, not perfect. Water still wept from 2 joints, but the main flow held. On the 3rd evening, she stood at the end of her pipe system and watched clean water pour from the last section into a bucket she had placed outside the shed door. Running water, 3 feet from where she slept. She had not had to walk to the spring wall, had not had to carry water in a heavy pail across uneven ground with her knees grinding. It came to her. She sat on the stone step and watched the bucket fill and felt a sensation she had to search her memory to identify. It had been so long. Pride. Not the complicated kind that tangles with vanity. The simple kind. The kind that comes from making something work with your own 2 hands. That night, she slept warm for the first time since the storm. Not because the shed had changed, but because she had spent the day doing instead of enduring, and the exhaustion that followed was different. Cleaner. The tiredness of a body that had been used, not merely suffered in. She moved to the quarry floor next, found a rake among the tools with enough teeth to function. Spent a week pulling dead weeds, picking up loose stones, smoothing the ground around the shed. Backbreaking does not begin to describe it. 3 times she had to stop entirely because her spine seized so completely she could not straighten from a bent position and had to wait frozen in a stoop for the muscles to release. Each time she thought, this is the one that finishes me. Each time, after 3 or 4 minutes of careful breathing, her back let go and she straightened and picked up the rake and continued. She was laying the first flat stones in front of the shed, creating a paved area that would keep mud from the door when she heard the footsteps. It was early December. Dawn had just broken. The air was sharp enough to sting her lungs. She was on her knees positioning a stone when the crunch of boots on gravel made her go still. Not Hazel's careful step, not the light tread of a woman. These were heavy boots, and they were not trying to be quiet. Vivian picked up the hammer she kept within arm's reach at all times now and stood. Her knees popped. Her back sent its usual complaint. She faced the quarry entrance and waited. The man who came around the ore pile was not what she expected. He was about 50, though hard living made it difficult to tell. His clothes were patched so many times the original fabric was a matter of speculation. His beard was matted, and his eyes were the particular shade of red that comes from whiskey and sleeping outdoors. He walked with the heavy certainty of a man who believes he is on his own ground. He stopped when he saw Vivian. His eyes moved from her face to the hammer in her hand to the shed behind her, with its new stone patio and patched roof and bucket of clean water catching the morning light. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, mostly. And underneath it, the particular confusion of a man who has come home to find someone else living in his house. "This is my quarry," he said. Vivian tightened her grip on the hammer. "This land belongs to me. I have the court papers. Would you like to see them?" His name was Otis Brennan, and he had worked this quarry for 11 years before the stone ran out in 1866. He had operated the winch and loaded the carts and cut limestone blocks with a precision that earned him a reputation across 3 counties. When the quarry closed, he lost his job, then his wife, then his house, then the series of lesser jobs that followed, each one smaller and more humiliating than the last, until there were no more jobs and no more houses and nothing left but a bottle and the memory of a place where his work had mattered. He had been sleeping in the quarry on and off for years. The shed had been his shelter. The mattress, his bed, the tools on the wall, relics of a time when his hands built things that lasted. And now a woman he had never met was standing in his spot, holding his hammer and telling him she had papers. They stood facing each other in the cold morning light. 2 people the world had discarded, arguing over possession of a hole in the ground. Vivian lowered the hammer first, not because she was no longer afraid, but because she recognized something in his face. She had seen it in her own reflection in the spring pool, the look of a person who has lost everything and is trying to hold on to the last thing that feels like theirs. "I'm not going to chase you off," she said. "You know this quarry better than I do. I need to know which walls are safe and which ones might come down, where I can dig and where I can't. You tell me that and I'll share what food I have." Otis looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the pipe system running from the spring wall to the shed, at the swept ground, at the flat stones laid with care. He was a man who understood labor. He could see it in the quarry the way a tracker reads prints in mud. "You did all this yourself?" he asked. "Who else would have?" He stayed 4 days. He did not talk much, and when he did, it was about stone. He showed Vivian the east wall where a long crack ran diagonally from the rim to the floor. "Don't go near that side," he said. "Water gets in that crack every winter, freezes, pushes it wider. One bad frost and the whole face could let go. 20 tons of limestone coming down faster than you can run." He showed her the south wall where the quarrying had stopped short of a section of softer stone. He knocked on it with an iron bar, and Vivian heard the difference immediately. Hollow. "Water's been eating through behind there for decades," Otis said. "There are cavities all through that section, big enough to stand in some of them. The foreman used to curse it because they'd hit a pocket and lose a whole day pumping water out." On his last morning, Otis took Vivian to a place she had not explored, a shelf of rock 20 feet above the quarry floor, accessible by a series of natural ledges that served as rough stairs. From this vantage point, Vivian could see the entire quarry laid out below her, and she could see something she had not noticed from ground level. The spring wall where her water source flowed was not a single formation. It was layered, and between the layers in several places, she could see the dark lines of water seeping through. Not one spring, a network. The quarry sat on top of an underground water table that expressed itself through dozens of small fractures in the limestone. "This was always a wet quarry," Otis said. "Good stone, but wet. That's partly why they gave up. Couldn't keep the water out. Didn't occur to them that the water might be worth more than the rock." He left that afternoon without saying goodbye. Vivian came back from gathering firewood to find him gone. On the workbench next to the crystal stone, he had left his folding knife. The blade was worn thin from years of sharpening. The handle was cracked horn, held together with wire, and it was the most valuable thing Otis Brennan owned in the world. Vivian understood the gesture. She placed the knife next to the crystal stone and did not move either one again. December deepened. Frost covered the quarry floor each morning, and Vivian learned that cold in an open pit of stone was a different animal than cold in a house. It came from below as well as above, radiating up through the rock floor into her boots, her legs, her spine. The shed walls blocked wind but held no warmth. Her cook fire, an open flame on a flat stone outside the door, gave heat only within arm's reach and died the moment she stopped feeding it. She needed a stove. She found the steel drum near the old winch house. Took half a day to roll it to the shed because it was too heavy to carry. Cut it in half with a saw that left her arms shaking for 2 days afterward. Positioned the half drum near the door open aside facing the room and built a fire inside it. Smoke filled the shed in 30 seconds. She coughed until she retched, stumbled outside and stood in the cold air with tears streaming down her face. She tried a chimney, took 3 of her remaining pipe sections and stacked them above the drum, angling them toward the door. The smoke went up, the pipes hit the angle and came back down. She restacked, re-angled, packed the joints, tested again. Smoke still poured into the shed, just slower. She spent a week on this problem. A week of smoky failures of eyes burning and lungs aching, and the particular frustration of knowing what she needed to accomplish, but not knowing how to make metal and fire obey. On the seventh day, she realized the problem was not the chimney, but the air supply. The drum was sealed on the bottom. Fire needed air from below. She punched holes in the base of the drum with a nail and hammer, 6 holes in a circle, and built the fire on a grate of thin iron bars she bent from scrap. Air flowed up through the holes, fed the flame from beneath, and the heat rose naturally into the chimney pipes and out through the gap above the door she had widened for this purpose. The fire burned clean. The smoke went up and out, and warmth, real warmth, filled the shed for the first time. Vivian sat beside her stove that evening and took stock. 6 weeks in the quarry, $12 down to her last 2. Living on salt pork and spring water and the dwindling supply of wild greens she could find in the winter quarry. Losing weight she could not afford to lose. Everything hurt always. But she was warm. She had running water. She had built something that worked. The crystal stone sat on the workbench, catching the firelight, and the folding knife lay beside it. She was not just surviving anymore. She was building. The week before Christmas, she began laying flat stones around the spring pool, shaping its edges into something deliberate. The work was slower than anything she had done before or forced him. Each stone had to be found, evaluated for flatness and size, carried to the pool, positioned, adjusted, repositioned. Her hands could barely grip by afternoon. Her knees felt like ground glass. On December 18th, she was fitting a heavy stone into place along the pool's edge when cold made the surface slick beneath her numb fingers. The stone slipped, fell, landed on her right foot with the full weight of 20 pounds of limestone dropping 12 inches. The pain was immediate, white, total. She heard herself cry out, a sound that bounced off the quarry walls and came back to her as something animal. She crawled back to the shed, pulling herself along the ground because standing on the foot was impossible. Inside, she unlaced her boot with fingers that shook so badly it took 5 minutes. Her foot was already purple, swelling fast. The entire top from toes to ankle was darkening into a bruise that looked like nightfall. Broken, she did not know. Possibly? Probably. There was no way to tell, and no money for the doctor in town 8 miles away. And even if she had the money, she could not walk to the cart, could not drive the horse, could not do anything except sit on this mattress and look at her ruined foot and feel every wall she had built inside herself over the past 6 weeks come crashing down. All of it. The determination, the anger that had kept her standing in the storm, the pride in her stove and her water system and her stone path. All of it collapsed at once, and underneath was the same hollow emptiness she had felt the first night, only worse, because now she knew what it cost to fight, and she could measure exactly how little fighting had gotten her. She was 64. She was alone. She was injured and starving and freezing. Her son had denied her in court. Her daughter had chosen silence. Her husband had melted her wedding ring. The town called her mad. A judge wanted her land, and she was sitting in a shed with a broken foot trying to make beauty from a hole in the ground. For whom? For what? She pulled the embroidered handkerchief from her coat pocket, Dorothy's handwriting in thread. For Mother, D.A. The only evidence that her daughter had ever loved her. Vivian held it against her face and breathed in, but it smelled like quarry dust now. The old life was gone from it. She lay down. The fire was dying. She should add wood. She did not move. Let the coal come. Let it finish what George and Walter and Hargrove had started. She stared at the ceiling and felt herself letting go, not all at once, but in a slow unclenching, the way a fist opens when the hand is too tired to hold anything anymore. She thought about stopping, simply stopping. Not eating tomorrow, not adding wood to the fire tonight, not getting up, lying here until the cold or the hunger or the loneliness did what it was always going to do. No one would know for weeks, possibly months. By spring, someone might come. Or not, it did not matter. She did not matter. She thought, I am not enough. I have never been enough. The shed grew darker as the fire burned down. The cold crept in from the walls and the floor and the broken window. Vivian lay still and felt it settle over her. Then her eyes, drifting in the dimness, found the workbench. The crystal stone. She could barely see it. Just a shape in the dark, the fire too low to throw light that far. But she knew what it looked like in the light. She knew the vein that ran through worthless gray. She knew it sparkled without anyone watching, that it had been there inside the wall for centuries before she broke it free. Beautiful in the dark, beautiful alone, beautiful without permission. Vivian sat up. It hurt. Everything hurt. Her foot screamed, her back screamed, her hands screamed. She sat up anyway. She limped to the workbench. 3 steps that took an eternity, picked up the stone, held it in both hands, feeling its weight and its cold and its rough surface and the thin ridge of crystal under her thumb. I still matter, she said it out loud. Her voice was destroyed, barely a rasp. Even if no one sees it, even if no one cares, I still matter. She limped to the stove, 3 more steps, added wood, blew on the embers until flame caught, fed it until the fire was strong again, and warmth began to push the coal back. She ate the last handful of cold rice from the pot, elevated her foot on a folded blanket, and sat in the returning warmth and held the stone and made a choice. Before this night, she had worked to prove something, to George, to Walter, to the world. After this night, the work was for her. The building was for her. The beauty she created in this quarry existed because creating it made her feel alive, and that was reason enough. She did not need an audience. She did not need approval. She did not need George to regret, or Walter to apologize, or Dorothy to come. She needed to honor the woman she was discovering underneath a lifetime of being defined by other people's needs. That was worth staying alive for. Morning came. Vivian's foot throbbed and her body felt like it had been taken apart and reassembled by someone who did not read the instructions. But she was breathing. She was warm. She was choosing to continue. She rested the foot for 2 weeks, forced herself to stay off it, which was its own kind of agony, for a woman who had learned that stillness meant drowning. She used the time to plan, drew rough sketches on the backs of old labels peeled from paint cans, mapped the quarry from memory, marked where the sun hit at different times of day, where the water flowed, where the stone was good, where Otis had warned her away. When she could walk, again limping, but mobile, she went back to work. But the work felt different now. Before the injury, she had built with the furious energy of someone fighting against something, against George, against being discarded, against the world's verdict. Now she built with the quiet focus of someone creating for the simple purpose of creation. Each stone she placed was not a rebuttal. It was a sentence in a language she was learning to speak for the first time. The language of a woman building a life that answered to no one but herself. Late January. Hazel came again. 3rd visit. More food, more news. The news was bad. Hargrove is moving forward, Hazel said. He's drafting an order to reclaim the quarry. Official reason is structural danger. Says the walls are unstable, says a woman living alone in an active hazard is a public safety concern. Hazel paused. The real reason is the railroad. Survey team came through town last week. They are looking at routes through the north end of the county. This quarry is right in the path. Vivian absorbed this. 6 weeks of building of bleeding hands and broken foot and sleepless nights and choosing to stay alive. And now they wanted to take the ground out from under her. There's someone who might help, Hazel said. A lawyer in Briarfield, Warren Locke. He handles land cases for small farmers against the railroad companies. He's beaten Hargrove before some dispute over a right-of-way 6 years back. Hargrove hates him. Locke would probably enjoy taking another case against the man. I have no money for a lawyer. Locke takes cases on principle when the principle involves Clifford Hargrove losing. The ride to Briarfield was 30 miles in Hazel's cart, and Vivian felt every rut and stone in her healing foot. Locke's office was above a dry goods store on Market Street. He was a lean man in his 50s with sharp eyes and the particular patience of someone who has spent decades reading documents designed to be incomprehensible. He read Vivian's divorce papers, read the quarry deed, read the county survey records she did not know existed, but Locke pulled from his own files. Then he looked up. The divorce settlement grants you ownership of the quarry parcel, not use. Ownership. Hargrove knows this. For him to reclaim the land, he needs to prove structural danger before a county review board, and the board has to agree that the danger is severe enough to override a property right. Locke tapped the deed. If you can demonstrate that the quarry is a functioning residence, that you have made structural improvements, that you are living there safely and productively, his case falls apart. He can't call it a public hazard if a 64-year-old woman has been living there for months without incident. What do I need? Witnesses. People who have been to the quarry's senior improvements can testify that the place is safe and maintained. Your word alone won't be enough. Hargrove will argue you're incompetent, irrational, a danger to yourself. You need other voices. Vivian thought about who had seen the quarry. Hazel. Otis, who was gone. That was the complete list. I don't have witnesses. Then find some. You have until Hargrove files his order. I'll stall the paperwork as long as I can, but you probably have until summer. The ride home was long and cold. Vivian sat beside Hazel and watched the winter fields pass and thought about what Locke had said. She needed people. She had spent 2 months in near total isolation, speaking to no one except Hazel and a drifting quarry worker who had already disappeared. She had been alone, and she had been building alone, and she had been finding herself alone, and now the thing that might save her home was the one thing she did not have. Other people. Hazel read her silence. I know some women in town, Viv. Women like you. Edith Holloway lost her husband last year, and her son sent her to live with cousins in Lehigh County. She hates it there. Frances Keller is 72, and her children act like she's already dead. There are others. She paused. They've heard about you. The whole town has. Most of them think you're crazy. But a few of them, the ones who know what it's like to be told you're finished, they think you might be brave. Vivian looked at Hazel. Why would they come to a quarry? Hazel smiled, the kind of smile that holds sadness and knowledge in equal measure. Because you're doing what they wish they had the nerve to do. February into March. Winter loosened. Days grew longer by minutes that felt like hours. Vivian returned to work with a clarity of purpose she had not possessed before. Every improvement was now two things at once, a piece of beauty and a piece of evidence. Every stone, laid every pipe, fitted every cleared path, was an argument she was building for a courtroom she might never enter but had to be ready for. The pool took shape, flat stones lining the edge in a border that looked intentional, designed, cared for. She cleared the area around it, creating an open space that caught the afternoon sun. Birds came. First, the winter regular sparrows and chickadees, drawn by the only open water for miles. Then, as February warmed into something that was not yet spring, but was no longer the killing cold of January, a cardinal. A single male, red as a wound against the gray stone, perching on the pool's edge and drinking. Vivian watched him from 10 feet away, not moving, barely breathing. The bird drank and bathed and shook water from his feathers in a spray of droplets that caught the light, and then he flew to the quarry rim and sat there and sang. It was the first music Vivian had heard in 3 months that was not wind or water or her own voice talking to stone. She expanded the pipe system along the south wall using every scrap of iron Otis had shown her. Water now flowed not just to the shed but along the wall in a series of small drops where the natural ledges of the quarried stone created steps. The effect was accidental, but when she stood back and listened, the sound of water falling from level to level filled the quarry with a gentle, continuous voice that replaced the silence she had lived inside for months. The shed became more than shelter. She built rough furniture from salvaged wood, painted the inside walls with the last usable paint she found in rusted cans, laid a mosaic border across the concrete floor from stones she had sorted by shade. The space was still small and rough, but every choice inside it was hers. What color to paint, where to place the table, how to arrange the shelf. No one had approved any of it. No one had been consulted. And the freedom of that was so unfamiliar, it sometimes stopped her in the middle of a task, hands still chest tight, overwhelmed by the simple fact that she was building a life that answered to no one. One morning in late March, Vivian climbed to the ledge Otis had shown her and looked down at 4 months of work. The quarry was not the same place. The shed sat in the center of a cleared space with stone paths radiating outward. The pool reflected sky. Water cascaded down the far wall. The beginnings of garden beds filled with composted leaves and crushed limestone waited for seeds. And everywhere in the careful placement of stone and the intentional routing of water and the clean lines of the paths was evidence of a human mind choosing to make order from chaos, choosing beauty over survival, choosing to matter. She was thinner than she had been in October. The weight loss from winter showed in her face and her clothes, but her arms had muscle they had never carried. Her hands, though swollen, moved with a confidence born from months of daily use. Her back still hurt, would always hurt, but it held her upright, and she trusted it now in a way she never had, when all it did was carry her from room to room in George's house. She had survived winter, survived cold and hunger and injury, and the night she almost let go. She had done more than survive. She had created. And in creating, she had discovered something that no court and no husband and no ungrateful child could take from her. She knew now what she was capable of. She had tested herself against stone and cold and pain and loneliness, and she had not broken. Spring was coming. Green things were pushing through the quarry floor. The air was losing its edge. And Vivian had plans. A garden in the sunniest section. More water features. The far end of the quarry she had barely touched. Exploration of the cavities Otis had described in the south wall, the hollow places where water had carved spaces inside the stone. She climbed down from the ledge, carefully placing her feet where she had learned the rock was solid, and walked back to work. There was always work, and she was grateful for it. But the work was about to be interrupted. Because 3 days later, on a cold morning at the end of March, Vivian heard the sound of heavy wheels on the quarry road, and a wagon she had never seen before came around the bend, carrying 2 men and a set of surveyor's stakes. The man who stepped down first was about 45, broad-shouldered, wearing a canvas coat and boots that had seen real work. He carried a rolled map under one arm and a measuring chain over his shoulder. The second man was younger, an assistant, already pulling stakes from the wagon bed. The older man looked at Vivian the way a man looks at furniture in a room he is planning to empty. "Mrs. Ashford." "Who's asking?" "Name's Fenton, county surveyor. I'm here on order of Judge Hargrove to assess the structural safety of this quarry." He did not ask permission to enter. He walked past Vivian and into the quarry as if she were a fence post. His assistant followed, carrying stakes and a mallet. Fenton unrolled his map and began walking the perimeter, pausing to examine walls, making notes with a pencil. The assistant drove stakes into the ground at intervals, marking positions Vivian did not understand. Vivian followed Fenton across the quarry floor. "This is my property. I have a legal deed. The deed gives you the land, ma'am. Doesn't give you the right to inhabit a structurally unsound excavation site. This quarry was abandoned for a reason. It was abandoned because the good stone ran out, not because it was unsafe." Fenton stopped walking and looked at her. Not with cruelty, with the patient condescension of a man who believes he is dealing with someone who does not understand the situation. "Ma'am, I will file my report with Judge Hargrove next week. My recommendation will be that this quarry represents a structural hazard and that continued habitation poses unacceptable risk. I suggest you make arrangements to relocate." He continued his survey, drove more stakes, made more notes, measured the height of the walls with instruments Vivian had never seen. Then he and his assistant loaded their equipment, climbed back onto the wagon, and drove away without another word. Vivian stood in the quarry entrance and watched the wagon disappear up the road. Her hands were clenched at her sides so tightly that her arthritic knuckles sent bolts of pain up both arms. They were not just taking her husband and her house and her money and her children. They were coming for the last thing, the ground she stood on, the home she had built with bleeding hands from nothing. The same pattern repeated. Let the woman do the work, then take what she has made. She went inside the shed, found the cleanest piece of paper she had, sat at her table and began to write. Every improvement dated as closely as she could remember. Every stone laid, every pipe fitted, every day of labor. If they were going to take her quarry, she would make them answer for every hour she had spent building it. But she needed more than a list. She needed what Locke had told her she needed. She needed witnesses, and she had no idea where to find them. She sat at the table list in front of her pencil in hand and stared at the shed wall she had painted herself. Outside, the sound of water cascading down stone filled the quarry with its steady, patient voice. Inside, the crystal stone caught a slant of afternoon light and scattered it across the paper, where Vivian's inventory of her own labor sat waiting for anyone to read it and believe. The garden came up in late April like a secret the earth had been keeping. Vivian had built the beds through March, hauling composted leaves and crushed limestone and bird droppings from beneath the nesting ledges on the south wall. She mixed it all together with quarry soil that had never grown anything and did not seem inclined to start. She planted seeds she had found in a rusted tin at the back of the tool, shed seeds so old and dry they looked like small stones themselves. And she planted them with no expectation, because expectation was a luxury she had stopped affording. But something in the combination of mineral-rich dust and rotted leaves and water from the spring created soil that wanted to produce. The first green shoots appeared on a Tuesday morning, 3 thin lines of pale green pushing through dark earth, and Vivian knelt beside them with her mouth open and her hands hovering as if the shoots were flames she was trying to warm herself against. Tomatoes. She was almost certain they were tomatoes. Something she had planted was choosing to live. She was kneeling in dirt with her fingers near those green threads when she heard a sound that made her stomach drop through the floor of her body. Hoofbeats, the particular rhythm of a matched pair of horses pulling a quality carriage. She knew that rhythm. She had listened to it every Sunday for 30 years riding beside George to church. Vivian stood slowly, brushed dirt from her knees, felt the old reflex fire through her nervous system, the one trained by 3 decades of marriage. Fix your hair, straighten your dress, make yourself presentable for him. The reflex was so strong it moved her hand halfway to her braid before she caught it and forced it back down. No, she stood where she was, dirty hands, dirty knees, work clothes stained with months of labor. She stood and she waited. George's carriage came around the ore pile and into the quarry and stopped near the pool. He climbed down. Vivian watched him and felt the strangeness of seeing a face she had known for 30 years in a place that belonged entirely to the person she had become without him. He looked like a man from a different story wandering into the wrong chapter. He had gained weight. His hair was grayer. He wore a new coat that probably cost more than Vivian had spent in 6 months of survival. He stood beside his carriage and looked around the quarry, and Vivian saw his face move through a sequence of expressions so transparent she could read them like weather. Shock first. He had expected to find her broken living in squalor evidence that she could not manage without him. Then confusion. The paths, the pool, the cascading water, the garden beds, the shed with its painted walls visible through the open door. This did not match the story he had told himself about her. Then something Vivian had not expected to see on George Ashford's face. Awe. My God, Viv, what have you done? Vivian walked towards him. She did not hurry. She let him look. Let him stand in the middle of proof that every assumption he had made about her was wrong. She stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to breathe. Hello, George. He was staring at her, trying to match the woman standing in front of him with the woman he had left. The woman he left was quiet, accommodating, invisible in the particular way that long married women become invisible to husbands who have stopped looking. This woman was thin and brown from months of outdoor work, standing with the balanced posture of a person whose body has learned to carry weight, meeting his eyes without the old habit of looking away first. I came to check on you, he said. You never answered my letters. I never received any letters, George. This landed between them like a stone. Both of them understood what it meant. Letters sent to a quarry with no postal address. Letters that may never have been written at all. George walked towards the pool. Vivian followed at a distance, watching him take in the stone-lined edges, the clear water, the birds that scattered at his approach and resettled on the quarry rim, complaining. He looked at the water cascading down the far wall, at the revealed cavities in the south wall with their mineral deposits catching the light, at the garden beds with their impossible green shoots. He came back to face her, shaking his head. This is incredible. How did you, with what money? No money, just what was here. You did this alone at your age. At your age, 6 months of bleeding hands and broken foot and nights of choosing to live. And he reduced it to her age. Yes, Vivian said, alone at 64. George walked to the shed, looked inside, came back out with an expression Vivian had never seen him wear in all their years together. The expression of a man who has just realized he made a catastrophic miscalculation and is only now beginning to understand its dimensions. Viv, this is beautiful, really beautiful. I had no idea you could do something like this. That you had this in you. There it was, the sentence that contained their entire marriage. He had no idea. 30 years beside her, and he never knew what she was capable of because he never looked, never wondered, never asked. I didn't know either, Vivian said, because I never had the chance to find out. George was quiet for a moment. Then he said what she realized he had come to say, what the carriage and the new coat and the carefully timed visit were all designed to deliver. Viv, I made a terrible mistake leaving you. I see that now. Looking at all of this, looking at you. Come back. Come home. We can start over. Vivian examined what she felt, searched inside herself for the rage, the grief, the vindication, something, and found to her surprise nothing. Not emptiness, completion. She was standing on ground she had earned with her own body surrounded by evidence of her own hands, and the man who had discarded her was asking to take her back. It was supposed to be the moment of triumph, the scene the audience cheers for. But Vivian did not feel triumphant. She felt finished, not with life, with him. No. Viv, please. George, look around. Really look. Do you know why this place is beautiful? He glanced around, confused by the question. Because I made it for myself. Not to impress anyone, not to make someone else comfortable, not because it was expected. I made it because I wanted to, because it brought me something I didn't have a name for until I was kneeling in dirt at 64. She stepped closer. Her voice was steady, not angry, not cold, just clear. For 30 years, I made your house beautiful, made your life run smoothly, made everything work. And you looked at me and saw nothing worth keeping. You gave me a shed and a hole and called it fair. I know I was wrong. You weren't wrong for leaving me, George. You were wrong for never seeing me. And I was wrong for letting my worth depend on whether you did. She looked at the quarry, at her quarry. You gave me this place because you thought it was worthless, because you thought I was worthless. But you were wrong about both. George's face held the particular pain of a man who understands too late. So that's it. You're staying here alone. I'm staying here doing work that matters to me, living a life that is mine. Alone is fine. Alone means I get to be the person I never got to be when I was busy being your wife. She gestured toward his carriage. You should go, George. Thank you for coming. I appreciate knowing you didn't want me to die out here. But I'm not dying. I'm living. Probably for the first time. Goodbye, George. She turned and walked back to her garden, back to the green shoots in the dark soil and the work of making things grow. She heard him stand there, heard the creak of the carriage as he climbed up, heard the reins snap and the horses move, and the wheels grind up the quarry road and fade into nothing. When the last sound was gone, Vivian sat down on the edge of a garden bed and found that her hands were trembling. Not from fear, not from regret, from the weight of what she had just done. She had stood in front of the man who had taught her to doubt herself, and she had not folded, not bent, not wavered. She had spoken the truth of her own worth to the person who had most thoroughly denied it, and she had remained standing. Her hands shook for 10 minutes. Then they stopped. She picked up her trowel and went back to planting. May arrived warm and full of green. Vivian turned 65 on the 14th. She celebrated alone sitting on the stone bench beside the pool, eating the first ripe tomato from her garden. It was small and imperfect, slightly lopsided with a crack running down one side. It was the finest thing she had ever tasted. 3 days after her birthday, the county sheriff rode into the quarry carrying a document with Judge Hargrove's seal. Official order, Vivian had 30 days to vacate the quarry. Ground structural hazard unfit for habitation, danger to the occupant and to public safety. The sheriff was a man named Comstock who had known Vivian for 20 years and who handed her the paper with the particular discomfort of a man carrying out an order he knows is wrong but lacks the courage to refuse. I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashford, I'm just delivering what they gave me. Vivian took the paper. Read it carefully. Folded it and put it in her pocket next to Dorothy's handkerchief. Thank you, Sheriff. He left quickly as if the quarry might hold him accountable for what he had brought. Vivian sat at her table that evening and wrote to Warren Locke. Then she waited. Locke's reply came by messenger 4 days later. He was filing a challenge. The hearing would be set for August before the county review board. He repeated what he had told her in January. Bring witnesses. This time she had them. Hazel had kept her word. Through the spring, women had begun appearing at the quarry, not in groups, one at a time carefully the way animals approach a water source they are not sure is safe. Edith Holloway came first. 68 widowed sent by her son to live with cousins who treated her like an inconvenience. She rode 3 hours in a borrowed buggy to see the quarry Hazel had described to her, and when she arrived and stood at the entrance and looked down at what Vivian had built, she did not speak for a long time. She walked the paths, sat by the pool, touched the stone walls, listened to the water. Then she said, "My husband died last year. My son says I should go into a home for the elderly, that I am too old to take care of myself." She looked at Vivian with eyes that held a question she was afraid to ask out loud. Am I? You're standing in a quarry that a 64-year-old woman rebuilt with her bare hands, Vivian said. You tell me. Edith came back the next week, and the week after. Vivian did not lecture her, did not dispense wisdom. She handed Edith a rake and said, "The path by the south wall needs clearing." Edith cleared it. The next visit, Vivian gave her stones to sort for the pool border. Edith sorted them. The week after, Edith arrived with a bag of flower seeds she had saved from her own garden, the garden her son had sold along with her house, and asked if there was a sunny spot where she might plant them. There was. Edith planted. And something in the act of pushing seeds into soil with her own fingers, of making a choice about what would grow, and where unknotted a thing inside her that had been tightening since the day her son decided she was finished. Frances Keller came next, 72, three children who visited at Christmas and called on her birthday and otherwise behaved as though she had already died and they were simply waiting for the formality of a funeral. Frances was tall and thin and angry in the quiet, corrosive way of a woman who has swallowed her rage for so long it has begun to eat her from the inside. Vivian did not ask Frances to talk about her feelings. She asked Frances to help her move rocks, large ones. The kind of work that requires two people and produces the specific satisfaction of accomplishing something heavy. They worked side by side for an afternoon, grunting and straining and sweating, and at the end of it, Frances sat down on the wall they had built together and said, "I haven't felt this useful in 5 years." Vivian nodded, and same wall tomorrow. Mabel Tate came in June, 66. Her husband had died of tuberculosis the previous winter, and Mabel had discovered in the months after his death that she had no idea who she was without him. She had been a wife for 43 years. It was not just a role, it was an identity, and when it was removed, she found nothing underneath, just a woman-shaped space where a person should have been. Mabel did not need to be told what to do. She watched the other women working and joined them quietly the way a river joins another river at a confluence. She planted, she carried, she built. And slowly over weeks, the woman-shaped space began to fill with something. Not who she had been. Someone new. Someone who could lay stone and pull weeds and make decisions about where a path should turn. By midsummer, 7 women came to the quarry regularly. Their ages ranged from 56 to 74. They came on different days and sometimes all together, and the quarry filled with voices and laughter and the sound of work being done by people who had been told they were past the age of doing anything. Vivian did not run the group, did not organize or direct or lead. She worked alongside them, and when someone needed to know how to do something, how to fit stones, how to channel water, how to turn a rusted piece of iron into something functional, she showed them, not by explaining, by doing it while they watched and then handing them the tool. One afternoon in late July, Vivian sat by the pool surrounded by 6 women, all of them working on small projects. Edith was building a small secondary pool. Frances was constructing a low wall to terrace a section of the garden. Mabel was weaving a basket from quarry grasses. The sound of their work and their talk and their occasional laughter filled the quarry the way water fills a vessel, completely finding every empty space. Edith looked up from her work and said, "Vivian, you saved my life. You know that." Vivian shook her head. "I didn't save anything. You saved yourself. You just needed to see it was possible." "No," Frances said. She did not look up from her wall. She kept working, fitting stone to stone. "Edith is right. You showed us. You showed us we still had something to build with." Vivian did not argue. She had learned over these months that sometimes the most generous thing you could do was let someone thank you without deflecting it. The hearing was set for August 12th. Vivian rode to Millhaven with Hazel in the early morning, wearing her cleanest work clothes because she did not own anything else, and because work clothes were honest and she was done pretending to be anything other than what she was. The county review board met in the same courthouse where her divorce had been finalized 10 months ago. Different room, different judge, a man named Pruitt from the neighboring county brought in because Locke had successfully argued that Hargrove's involvement created an irreconcilable conflict of interest. Hargrove sat in the gallery, arms crossed, watching. Locke presented Vivian's case with the methodical patience of a man laying bricks. He described the improvements, the water system, the dwelling, the garden, the paths. He presented Vivian's handwritten inventory of every day of labor, every stone laid, every repair made. Then he called witnesses. Hazel Pennington went first. She described her 3 visits, the condition of the quarry at each stage, the clear trajectory from abandoned site to functioning homestead. She spoke plainly without drama, and her plainness was its own kind of power. Edith Holloway followed. She described the quarry as she had found it in May. "The safest, most cared-for piece of ground I have set foot on in years," she said. "Safer than the house my cousins keep, which has a porch that's been threatening to collapse since 1878. Frances Keller was brief. "I go to that quarry every week. I have never felt unsafe there. I have felt many things. Useful, capable, welcome, not unsafe." Hargrove's lawyer called his witness. Walter Ashford walked to the front of the room, and Vivian felt the old wound open again. Her son, standing against her for the second time. He had put on a tie for the occasion. He looked respectable, uncomfortable, and very much like a man who was doing something he knew was wrong, but had decided to do anyway because the alternative required a courage he did not possess. My mother is not capable of living alone, Walter said. He addressed the board, avoiding Vivian's eyes with the same determined concentration he had shown at the divorce hearing. She is 65 years old. She has arthritis. She has no income. She is living in a tool shed in an abandoned quarry. This is not the behavior of a competent person. It is the behavior of someone who needs care. Locke stood for cross-examination. He held a single piece of paper. Mr. Ashford, how many times have you visited your mother at the quarry since she moved there 10 months ago? Walter's jaw tightened. I have not visited. Not once in 10 months. No. So your testimony about her capabilities is based on what exactly? On common sense, she is 65. Mrs. Prescott is 70, and she visits regularly. Mrs. Keller is 72, and she works at the quarry every week. Are they also incompetent? That's different. How? Walter did not answer. Locke let the silence hold for 3 beats. Then he sat down. The board chairman was preparing to call for deliberation when the door at the back of the courtroom opened. Vivian heard it, the creak of hinges, the whisper of movement in the gallery. She did not turn around. She was looking at the board, at Pruitt's unreadable face, at Hargrove's rigid posture, and she was thinking about what would happen if she lost, where she would go, what would be left. Then Locke touched her arm. She turned. Dorothy was walking down the center aisle of the courtroom. Vivian's daughter, 34 years old, dark hair, pinned up, wearing a traveling dress that was wrinkled from a long ride. She walked with the particular determination of a woman who has made a decision that terrified her and is now moving fast enough that fear cannot catch up. Dorothy did not look at George, who sat 3 rows back, did not look at Walter, who had gone pale. She walked directly to the witness stand and addressed the chairman. Sir, my name is Dorothy Ashford. I am Vivian Ashford's daughter. I would like to make a statement. Pruitt looked at Locke, who nodded. Pruitt looked at Hargrove's lawyer, who hesitated, then shrugged. Pruitt gestured for Dorothy to proceed. Dorothy stood at the front of the room. She looked at her mother. Vivian looked back. 10 months of silence hung between them all. The letters not written, the visits not made, the side not taken. 2 weeks ago, Dorothy said, I went to the quarry. My mother was not there. She had gone to town for supplies. Dorothy's voice was steady, but her hands gripped the railing of the witness stand hard enough to whiten her knuckles. I walked through the quarry alone. I saw the paths she built, the water she channeled, the garden she planted, the home she made from a tool shed everyone said was worthless. She paused. The courtroom was silent. I saw what my mother built, and I understood something I should have understood 10 months ago. I should have understood it 30 years ago. My mother is not incompetent. She is not crazy. She is not a danger to herself. Dorothy's voice cracked, and she let it crack. She did not try to smooth it over. My mother is the strongest person I have ever known. I did not see it before because I was not looking. None of us were. We were too busy deciding she was old, she was useless, she was past the point of mattering. Dorothy looked at Walter, then at George, then back at the board. I was silent for 10 months because I was afraid to choose. I told myself that not choosing was neutral. It isn't. Silence always serves the person with more power. My silence served my father, and it served Judge Hargrove, and it failed my mother, and I am here today to stop being silent. She turned to Vivian. I'm sorry, Mother. I am sorry it took me this long. Vivian's vision blurred. She blinked and felt wet on her cheeks and did not wipe it away because these tears were not the kind you hide. They were the kind that mark a moment, the moment her daughter chose to see her. The board deliberated for 14 minutes. They denied Hargrove's petition unanimously. The quarry was Vivian's property legally and without further challenge. Outside the courthouse, Dorothy held Vivian for a long time. Neither of them spoke. The afternoon sun fell on them through the elm trees that lined the courthouse square, and the sounds of Millhaven moved around them the way a stream moves around 2 stones standing together in the current. Finally, Dorothy pulled back. Her face was wet. I came to the quarry to see if the stories were true. I didn't expect to find what I found. What did you find? My mother, the real one. The one who was hiding behind 30 years of being who everyone else needed her to be. Vivian took her daughter's face in both hands. Swollen, rough, calloused hands with dirt permanently embedded in the creases. Hands that had laid stone and channeled water and built a home from nothing. She held her daughter's face in those hands and said, You came, that's enough. That has always been enough. September arrived cool and golden. Edith brought her daughter Nora to the quarry on a Saturday afternoon. Nora was 40, recently abandoned by a husband who left for someone younger. A story so familiar, Vivian felt it resonate in her bones like a tuning fork struck against the same note. Nora looked around the quarry with the wide, stunned eyes of a person encountering something they cannot reconcile with their expectations. She was thin in the wrong way. The way you get thin when eating feels like too much effort. Her hands twisted together constantly, wringing some invisible cloth. Vivian did not sit Nora down and tell her story, did not explain the philosophy she had arrived at through months of cold and pain and solitude. She had learned that wisdom delivered as lecture is wisdom wasted. Instead, she walked to the tool shed, came back with a spade, and held it out. New bed going in along the east wall. Soil needs turning. Nora looked at the spade, then at Vivian, then at the spade again. She took it. She followed Vivian to the east wall. She dug. The first 20 minutes were clumsy. Nora had never turned soil in her life. Her grip was wrong. Her angle was wrong. She hit rocks and stumbled, and once drove the blade into the ground so crookedly, it stuck and she had to wrestle it free. But Vivian did not correct her. She dug alongside her, matching pace, saying nothing. After an hour, something changed. Nora stopped wrestling the spade and started working with it. Her strokes found rhythm. Her body learned the motion the way a body learns any motion, through repetition and the gradual surrender of thought to action. She was sweating. Dirt was on her face and in her hair and under her fingernails. And for the first time since she arrived, she was not wringing her hands. They stopped to drink water from the spring. Nora sat on a stone and looked at the quarry. "Weren't you lonely?" Vivian considered the question. She owed this woman honesty, not comfort. "I was lonelier in 30 years of marriage. Because in marriage I was useful, but I was not seen. Here working alone, I finally saw myself." Nora nodded slowly, not understanding yet, but hearing. "You're 40, Vivian said. "You have decades. I was 64 when I started, and I wasted 3 months thinking it was too late before I realized there is no such thing as too late. There is only today, and today you can dig." Nora dug. She came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. She planted the east wall bed herself, choosing the seeds, choosing the spacing, making decisions that were small and practical and entirely her own. Vivian watched her and recognized the precise moment when the work stopped being distraction and became purpose. It was visible in the way Nora's shoulders dropped, in the way her hands stopped wringing and started doing, in the way she looked at the bed she had planted and saw not just seeds and dirt, but evidence that she could still create something. October came around again, 1 year. Vivian woke early on the anniversary, not because she had marked it on a calendar, but because her body knew. 1 year since the courtroom. 1 year since the shed. 1 year since the night in the rain when she broke a stone from a wall and found crystal in water, and the first faint evidence that the quarry was not dead, only hidden, and so was she. She stepped outside into cool morning air. The quarry lay before her in early light, and she let herself really look at it the way a person looks at something they have built when they finally stop building long enough to see. The tool shed sat at the center of radiating stone paths. Its walls were painted, its roof solid, its door hung true on hinges. She had straightened herself. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin line that meant the fire she had banked the night before was still holding. The garden beds, 8 of them, now curved along the quarry walls and terraces that followed the natural contour of the excavation. Some were harvested, the soil dark and resting. Some still held late-season greens. One along the south wall was thick with the flowers Edith had planted, in June marigolds and zinnias blooming stubbornly against the coming cold. The pool was still. Its stone border held the sky in a perfect circle of blue. From the south wall, water moved through the system she and Otis had mapped together in those 4 days that felt like a lifetime ago, cascading in soft steps that filled the quarry with a sound that was not silence and not noise, but something between, something alive. Vivian walked the path she had laid, touched the wall she had cleared, stopped at the 3 small cavities in the south wall where she still kept the things that mattered. The crystal stone, the folding knife, the handkerchief, 3 worthless objects that held the entire story of her year. She climbed to the ledge. From up here, the quarry looked like something a person had designed on purpose, not something a broken woman had assembled from scraps and stubbornness and the refusal to lie down. It looked like a garden, like a sanctuary, like a place where things grew. Voices below, wheels on the quarry road, 3 carts coming in one after another. Her women, Saturday gathering. Edith and Frances and Mabel, and two newer women whose names Vivian was still learning, women in their 50s and 60s, who had heard the story and come to see and stayed to work, and Dorothy's cart bringing up the rear. Her daughter came most Saturdays now. They did not talk about the 10 months of silence. They did not need to. Dorothy's presence was its own language spoken in the act of showing up, of working alongside, of choosing to be here when she could be anywhere else. Vivian descended carefully and met them at the bottom. The morning filled with greetings and the scrape of tools being gathered and the particular energy of people preparing to do something they care about with people they choose to be with. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. Vivian planted the last bed of the season winter greens that would hold through the cold months if she protected them with stone covers she was already planting. Edith expanded her flower garden. Frances and Mabel were building a new terrace on the west side, a project they had designed themselves, arguing cheerfully about the angle of the retaining wall. Dorothy weeded the east bed Nora had planted, maintaining another woman's work without being asked, a small act of stewardship that Vivian noticed and held in her heart without comment. Late afternoon, the sun was going down behind the quarry rim, sending long amber light across the floor. The women gathered by the pool, setting down tools, sitting on stones and walls, and the ground catching breath and sharing water and talking in the overlapping, comfortable way of people who have grown easy with each other. Edith said, "1 year, Vivian, 1 year since you came here." Vivian had not told anyone the date, but Edith was sharp and Hazel talked, and the quarry had a way of making significant things visible. 1 year, Vivian confirmed. "Do you ever think about going back?" Frances asked. Not to George, she meant back to the world, to town, to conventional life. Vivian looked around the quarry, at the garden and the pool and the cascading water and the shed that was now a home, and the women who sat around her, each of them, carrying a version of the same wound she carried, the wound of being told you are finished when you are not. She thought about the courthouse, about Walter's face when he could not answer Locke's question, about Dorothy walking down the aisle, about George standing in the quarry asking her to come home, and the absolute certainty she had felt when she said no. "I am back," she said. "This is where I was always going. I just didn't know it until I arrived." The women left as the light faded, carts rolling up the quarry road one by one, voices calling goodbye, the sound of horses and wheels diminishing until the quarry held only its own sounds again. Water, wind, the last birds settling for the night. Vivian sat alone by the pool as twilight deepened into dark. The first stars appeared above the quarry rim, framed by stone walls on three sides, a private sky. The water in the pool reflected them, and for a moment Vivian sat between two skies, the one above and the one below, and felt herself held by something larger than her own life. She was 65 years old. She lived alone in a quarry in rural Pennsylvania. She had no husband, no conventional home, no money beyond what her garden earned at the farmer's market in town. Her hands were permanently swollen. Her back ached every morning and every night, and most of the hours between. She was weathered and thin and gray-haired and covered in the fine dust of limestone that never fully washed away. And she was whole, not happy in the simple way that word usually means. Whole in the way a stone is whole, in the way a stream is whole, complete in itself, needing nothing added and nothing taken away. She went inside, sat at her table, opened the journal she had started in the spring, its pages filling slowly with the handwriting of a woman learning to articulate things she had only ever felt. She wrote, "1 year today. The woman who arrived here in October is gone. I don't mourn her. She was a woman who thought her value lived in someone else's eyes. She believed that without a husband, without a role, without someone to tell her she mattered, she was nothing. She was wrong. The woman writing this tonight knows something different. Value is not given. It is not earned. It is not bestowed by husbands or children or courts or communities. It exists because you exist. It is built every time you choose to create instead of surrender. Every time you lay a stone with hands that hurt. Every time you plant a seed in the soil that others said was dead. Every time you stand in front of someone who tells you that you are finished and you say not yet. Nora asked me last week if I had advice for her. I gave her a spade. That is my advice. Not words, tools, not philosophy, work. Build something. It does not matter what. Build it with your own hands and your own choices and your own sweat. And when you are done, stand back and look at it and know that it is yours, that you made it, that you are not too old, not too broken, not too discarded to create something that endures. I am 65. My hands hurt. My back hurts. Everything hurts. But it is the pain of a body being used, and I have learned that there is no pain worse than the pain of a body sitting idle while the world decides it is worthless. Tomorrow there will be more work. There is always more work. And I will meet it the way I have met every day of this year. With these hands, with this back, with this heart that learned finally at the bottom of a hole in the ground that it did not need anyone's permission to know its own worth. Vivian closed the journal. The fire crackled in the stove. Through the window, the quarry lay in moonlight, silver and shadow the pool, a dark mirror, the garden bed sleeping, the stone walls standing as they had stood for 100 years before her and would stand for 100 years after. She had come here to die. Instead, she had learned to live, not the life she had planned, or the life anyone would have chosen for her, but a life that was entirely, irreducibly, stubbornly hers. Built from discarded materials in an abandoned quarry by hands, the world said we're too old to build anything. Outside, water continued its patient work, flowing through stone, finding cracks, carving new paths, creating small pools in places no one could see. It did not ask permission. It did not wait for an audience. It simply moved, and in moving shaped the world around it. Vivian Ashford was 65 years old. She lived alone in a quarry. She slept in a shed she had rebuilt with her own two hands. And every morning when the sun broke over the rim and lit the stone walls, and the water caught the light and threw it back in scattered points of gold, she rose from her bed and walked outside and stood in a place that proved without words, without argument, without anyone's approval, that it is never too late to matter. That your hands can build beauty at any age. That being discarded by the world is not the same as being destroyed by it. Some things, when broken open, reveal what was hidden inside all along. The quarry had been waiting for her, and she all her life had been waiting for herself.